Hello and welcome to RT Ministries. My name is Duane and this is the Bible study portion of RT Ministries. And this week we're in Revelation chapter 12. We're going to see some signs in heaven this week. Chapter 12 is filled with signs. Well, there was great earthquakes, and I believe we ended up with the seventh trumpet, the two witnesses, and the seventh trumpet before. Now there's some signs. All right. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now this, again, this is a sign. It isn't an actual woman. It's a sign. It means, it's pointed, it means something. It's not a regular woman. In the Catholic Church, well, a lot of pictures in the Catholic Church, you'll see Mary. They think this is Mary. So you'll see a picture of Mary with the sun and the moon by her feet and the 12 stars in her round crown on her head. But this is a sign. It isn't a particular woman. And the sign is Israel. The 12 stars, or the crown of 12 stars on her head is the 12 tribes of Israel. And the sun and the moon is just the radiance of Israel. You know, I don't think there's to go too deep into that unless it's a sign of Israel. And in verse 2 it says, and she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And obviously, from the beginning, Israel was, it was foretold, God foretold it in Genesis, that Abraham's descendants would be, by the seed of him, all nations would be blessed, and Israel itself was going to give birth to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. All right, verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven. It's the second sign. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems. Okay, this is another sign. It's a great red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. This represents Satan. Obviously, the color red represents blood, and he said he was a murderer. Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning. And 7 heads, 10 horns represents past kingdoms and future kingdoms. And the crown, 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems, meaning that it represents Satan and his power over the kingdoms of this earth. You know, sometimes people forget that the world out there, all the systems and the governments and all that are controlled a lot by Satan. Now, God is in control of everything, but he does allow Satan to have a certain usurped authority on this earth, meaning God allows him to have the authority on this earth. And Satan is in charge of a lot of kingdoms, governments on this earth. You get a little look into that in Daniel, when Daniel prayed and the angel came and the Prince of Persia stopped him. So there's a lot of things happening behind governments in this world that we don't know about. And Satan does have authority on this earth, and soon Christ is going to take it away. And when he died on the cross, he had all authority. God has always had all authority, but Satan is let do things, but according to God's plans. 4, and his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them onto the earth. I'll stop there. His tail swept away, meaning the word in the Greek is drawn down. He drew down 1/3 of the angels with him when he rebelled. It seemed like Satan would have talked 1/3 of the angels with him, and they all fell. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, she might devour her child. Now, Satan from the beginning has been trying to kill Christ. When he was foretold and the wise men came looking for the Messiah, they promised king. Satan used Herod, and he killed all male children under 2 years of old in Ramah. So Satan has always been trying to kill Christ. Always in the Old Testament, he tried to eliminate Israel because Satan knew eventually through Israel the Messiah would be born. So he's been trying to devour or kill the child for a long time. And he obviously didn't do it because Christ went to the cross. Verse 5, and she gave birth to a son, Israel. Came out of the loins of Israel, Jesus Christ, a male child. who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. This is how we know it's Jesus Christ. He was the Messiah in the millennial kingdom is going to rule with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. After Jesus Christ died on the cross, God took him up to heaven. And now he's with God, in power with God. Verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Now this jumps to the fact that the woman fled into the wilderness. Israel fled. In the future, when the Antichrist is devouring people or killing people, he's going to ransack Jerusalem. He's going to take over Israel, or try to. And he's going to look like it's going to be taking over Israel, and Israel's going to flee. Jesus said on that day on the rooftops to run. He said, don't go back to get your cloak. Run for the hills. And there's a time Israel, as a nation, is going to run. And they're going to run into the forest. And right here it says God is going to take care of them. A place prepared for God for 3.5 years. God will take care of them, protect them supernaturally. Before I go on, the whole Bible, God's apple of God's eye has always been Israel. It's always been about Israel. Israel failed and rejected the Messiah, so he brought us Gentiles in as the church. And there's a day coming where the church will be done. There'll be the last Gentile into the church, and the church age is done. We'll be caught up with Christ in the rapture, and then Israel will be called on again, so to speak. Their time of trouble will be over. Their eyes will be opened, and God will use them to evangelize the world instead of the church. All right, verse 7. Now again, these are all signs. There isn't a red dragon out there. It's just a sign representing Satan, and the woman represented Israel. The dragon represents Satan, and the male child is obviously Christ. Verse 7, there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels waged war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war. Now there's a war going on now in heaven and on earth, but not like this. The war intensifies. For something sparks the intensity in the principalities, the spiritual realm out there. Something ramps it up. It gets real fierce. Because right now there's principalities and powers that they are watching us on this earth. There's a war going on that we can't see. We're alive now. We can't see the spiritual world. But when we die, we enter into the spiritual world. So you'll see it then. So Michael is a good angel, and his angels wage war with Satan and his angels. Verse 8, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. So Satan and his angels were not strong enough to fight against Michael and his angels. It says there's no longer a place found for them in heaven. The access to heaven will be stopped here. And we'll read 9. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. There's a day coming in the future where Michael and his angels, God's going to cut access from heaven off to Satan and throw him down to the earth, and he can no longer even access God or heaven. And that's coming. This is a good truth that the angels of God and God himself are a lot stronger than Satan. Some people think it's a big cosmic battle out there, that God is trying to do something and Satan keeps stopping him. Is that the true picture? No. Satan is nothing to God. God uses Satan for his purposes. God could destroy Satan at any time. But God is using him. And when God is done using, he's going to throw him in the lake of fire. So he knows his end's coming. So now Satan has been thrown down to the earth. Verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. This gives you a little picture of Satan and what he does. Whenever you sin, Satan accuses God day and night. All the time Satan's accusing God from some saint to another. Look what he did, look what he did, look what he did. And if you're in Christ, there's no accusation that can hold. He can accuse you, but it can't hold because you have a mediator, Jesus Christ, who can always say, I covered him, I've forgiven him. His sins are covered. But if you die without Jesus Christ, all his accusations will hold, and you'll be condemned because you have no intercessor. Satan accuses. It's bad enough in this life to be accused by one person, but Satan accuses God day and night, always, the saints. Verse 11, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. And here's a good picture of the saved people. It said they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. They didn't overcome Satan and the world system because of their good works or because they did this or because they did that. They overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, meaning they relied on Jesus Christ and him alone. And because of the word of their testimony, his word, the Bible. If you trust Jesus Christ, you can overcome this world. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. A true Christian they don't put their life ahead of the Lord. They put the Lord ahead of everything, even their own life. And the ones who drop away never really did come to the Lord. So it's a good picture of Christians in verse 11. Verse 12, for this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. So he's telling everybody that's in heaven right now to rejoice because you're not going to be part of what's going to go on down at the earth because Satan has just been thrown down to the earth. And do you think he's going to be angry? Then he says, woe to the earth and the sea because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. Now Satan will have been thrown down to the earth, and he's going to be extremely angry because he knows he's going to be thrown into hell soon. When people go down in this world, whether it's for crime or they get caught, they most generally take everybody down with them. That's just the way sin works. A sinful person will bring everybody down with him. Satan's going to be awful mad here. He's going to be mad and he's going to take his vengeance out on the people who dwell on the earth and the ones who follow the Lord. 13, and when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So Satan got thrown down to the earth, and when he realized what had happened, he has no access to heaven anymore. He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, Israel. He's going to go after Israel with a vengeance. He's going to go after, and he's going to be a bloodbath. He's going to have no mercy with Israel. 14. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, and times, and a half a time, from the presence of the serpent. All right, we'll dissect this a little bit. It says, but the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman. It means God's protection. An eagle is represented God many times in the Old Testament. So God is protecting Israel so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place. Remember the place we talked about in the previous verses where God would protect them, a place prepared by God. After Satan goes after Israel, Israel's going to run into the wilderness. It says where she is nourished for a time, a times, and a half. That's 3.5 years. The second half of the tribulation from the presence of the serpent. So God will protect them from all of Satan's. When Satan works, he's got to indwell somebody, right? He's going to indwell the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is going to, the whole world, he's going to gather all the armies, and they're going to go after Israel. 15, and the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. Now this is one of them symbolic things, The serpent poured out water like a river out of his mouth. We know water like a river doesn't come out of somebody's mouth, so this is symbolic of something. The serpent poured out water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, and most scholars think, and I agree, that this is an army. He takes his army, he pours out his army after Israel. It might cause her to be swept away with the flood or die. He sends the armies out to kill Israel. 16, but the earth helped the woman, And the earth opened up its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So God made the earth open up and swallow up the army, and that would be something God could easily do. He can do anything he wants to do. In Korah's rebellion, God opened up the earth and swallowed up the rebellious people. I mean, God can do anything he wants, and it's his earth, his creation. He drank up the river that the dragon poured out of his mouth. Again, it's the army. In 17, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So this is how chapter 12 ends. So the dragon was enraged. God protected Israel, now he's really mad. With the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children. Who's the rest of her children? Remember, when the church is pulled out, Israel's eyes are open to the Messiah. And all through the tribulation, Israel has accepted Christ. And all her children, of all the ones out there who accepted Christ, including Israel, they all have accepted Christ. It says, who keeps the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Israel will be the new Christians. And all the other ones they evangelize. He's going to make war. He can't get Israel specifically, so he's going to go off to the rest of the world and kill. Hear me, that he's going to kill all the Christians in the tribulation. Remember, there's people during the tribulation that are being saved left and right, but they're going to die. It's going to be a terrible place to be. Verse 12 is filled with some symbolism. You've seen the woman who represents Israel. There's Israel and the dragon and the male child. And everything that God promised from Genesis until now is now taking place. Israel has always been God's apple of his eye, and God has not forgot about Israel. They were under punishment. They were blinded. And soon, we've already read, their eyes have been opened. 144,000 were saved, and now they're evangelizing the earth. And Satan's after Israel specifically, the Jews. Satan has always hated Jewish people. He's always hated God's people. He hates Christians and he hates Jewish people. You know, you got times in history where the Jews have been persecuted, from Hitler to, way back before Hitler. And it's always demonically charged. Any anti-Semitism against a Jew or any hatred for a Jew is most likely demonically backed. So Satan hates the Jews and he hates Christians too. Well, thanks for tuning in, and next week we'll do Revelation chapter 13. Bye-bye.